Welcome to the AICGS At Issue interview series, the first of our series in 2012. And our first guest is, much to our delight, the former Finance Minister of Germany, Per Steinbrück. Welcome to AICGS. Per.
Thank you, Jackson.
We're glad to see you. You're in Washington. You're having a lot of conversations with your counterparts, people you've known for many years. And I wonder if you could bring us up to speed about where you think we are across the Atlantic before we start to talk a little bit about what's going on your side of the ocean in terms of talking to each other about solving these problems. You've written about this, you've experienced it as minister. How close do you think we've come to solving this problem jointly, and how much are we still on different paths, and what can we do about it?
Bluntly spoken, we are not as good as we should be.
Yeah.
And I think the continental or the Atlantic relations have been better in former decades. I can remember generations of American and German and European politicians who stayed in very close contact, and I think this is one of the mistakes we made during the last years. For us in Europe, it is really quite clear that the US policy is more and more focusing on the Asian Pacific region, and I can understand that to a far extent because the music is playing there, and we notice a shift of economic and political power and influence to this part of the world. But nevertheless, I think we should have a common interest on in the well, I call it Western civilization project, and that needs, in my eyes, a better cooperation, better relations between the US and the European members of the European Union.
What do you think are the fault lines when it comes to solving the economic crisis that we're still in since 2007, 2008?
Well, as far as I get it, the crisis management strategies differ to a wide extent between the European Union and the Americans. And we in Europe are not going to copy the macroeconomic crisis management in the US, for example, launching one stimulus packages after the other one, which is credit financed and does increase the public debts on one side, or to guarantee, for example, a zero interest rate for 4 or 3 years till 2015 or 16, because in our eyes it's very risky in a midterm view, perhaps causing the risk of inflation, something like that. And the American officials and American experts are very much criticizing the European crisis management, in particular the German position. So I think there is the need of a better coordination and a better discussion to explain to each other while strategies might differ, but it must be the same target, and it is a question how we can fulfill or reach these targets.
Why have we failed? Why have both sides of the Atlantic failed at speaking the same language?
I think only a few German politicians have close connections to the United States or to the establishment in the business sector as well as on the administration. And the same I notice whenever I talk to Americans. I think the American picture of Germany and the American picture of Europe is very much influenced by three sources: the Financial Times, the New York Times, and the Economist. But they don't describe Europe as it is.
Interesting that you mentioned two of those are English publications, and therefore you would suggest that maybe there's a continental difference between the way you're going at this problem and the way we are.
Yes.
Just before we go over to your side of the ocean, Per, do you see any positive signs here in the United States as far as our economy is going? Some would say it's picking up. Things are looking a little better. How do you see our situation from your very special vantage point?
Well, that's a very sensitive area.
That's why I'm asking you.
Because I don't, as a visitor, I don't want to blame anybody. But I think there are some big issues which have to be tackled in the United States too. We share the common the problem of a high debt crisis, of a public debt crisis or sovereign debt crisis. And bluntly spoken again, the public debt in the US is even higher than in the average of the European Monetary Union. Or the private debt in the United States is near to 100% of your GDP. And I would be a little bit concerned about the deficits of your current account and the disrepair of your public infrastructure, to name just some problems which have to be tackled. And to a wide extent, I'm really wondered how you can solve this debt crisis when I have a look to some Republican candidates who are promising enormous tax reductions which would definitely increase your debt crisis. As far as I get it, some institutes in the US figured out that they promises tax reductions in an amount of $600 to $1,200 billion each year. So how will you manage this debt crisis? To a far extent, you are definitely independent by foreign creditors, and the most important foreign creditor to cover all these deficits is China. I would be obsessed by this situation and development.
Yeah. And on the other side, you've mentioned the Republican side. The president has just proposed a budget today, and once again he's proposing to add some more little stimulus to the current budget to get the economy really going now that he sees that unemployment has gone down and there is a little bit of growth, a little bit more growth than probably previously expected.
Yes, I think this is the normal way in the US to give a reply on an answer on an economic downturn. But in the meantime, your figures improve slightly when I have a look to the workforce and to the growth rates. So I'm very much hesitating if I would launch an additional stimulus package which is credit financed, which will increase your public debt again, and suddenly you have a discussion like at the end of July and August how to increase the debt ceiling again. In Germany and in Europe, we are discussing not about a debt ceiling, we are talking about a debt break in our constitutions. So it's exactly the opposite to the discussion we are facing here in the US.
Let's turn to that and talk a little bit about what's going on in Europe right now. As a matter of fact, the Greece negotiations just last night agreed that they would try to form this new reform. They're going to discuss that further. How much staying power do you think what's going on in Athens right now has, and what do you think the European response can be, should be, over the coming days?
Greek is a very specific problem and very hard to solve because I see no perspective that Greece can improve its fundamental economic figures. The strategy has been concentrated on 2 points. On one side, to refinance their net borrowing requirements, and on the other side, to prescript sort of a solid consolidation program, which is very familiar to an austerity program for Greece. So they are turning down and turning down and turning down. Their growth rate is declining, their unemployment rate is increasing, their revenues are decreasing. So I think the situation is very severe. In my eyes, we are compelled to be helpful. That means to install or to establish a recovery program for Greece, in addition to, well, a consolidation program. I think one can be successful in doing both, to give incentives for growth and employment on one side and to consolidate the public budget on the other side. This has been successful in the US during the Clinton administration under the Secretary Rubin, and it has been successful in the times of the Grand Coalition in Germany in 2006 and 2007.
But still we don't see any signs of that. So far the focus has been on austerity, mainly on austerity. And at the latest European summit, they were looking desperately for funds somewhere else hidden at the Commission, in the budgets of the European Union, that could be used to spur growth in peripheral countries. But we're talking about very, very, very small amounts of money. Much more is needed for Greece.
Yes, but nevertheless, now the decision has to be passed to offer Greece a second umbrella, as I would like to name it. For example, these 130 billion euros. Perhaps it's necessary, because otherwise we would see a contagion in the case of an illiquidity or an insolvency. But in my eyes, it's for sure that the national parliaments of the Länder states will not pass and approve a third umbrella for Greece if nothing has been changed in the fundamental economic situation of this country, because all these taxpayers will say, well, I will give my good money for bad reasons in Greece while the situation is not improving in Greece.